Welcome to Unity of Charlotte. I'm sorry I scared you just then. Welcome to Unity of Charlotte on this beautiful spring morning. Let's say hello with a round of applause to everybody here. It is a beautiful congregation. Beautiful. Good to see you all. So our welcome here is to unity because unity is special. Our mission is to nurture a deep and mature experience of God through the practice of unity principles. And simply put, we're here to love, grow, and serve. And I'm Reverend Patrice, and it is my pleasure to be with you this morning. On my way here, I passed through, not around, a detour. I passed through a detour. Apparently the men were supposed to start at 9, but they were just getting going at about 9:11, and there was no roadblock. And of course, there are no blocks in my vision. So I moved right on through, and I heard a loud shout behind me that said, "No." And so I looked back and I said, "Oh, that was a partial roadblock," and did a U-turn. We here at Unity don't know about U-turns. We know only a straight path because we know that our thoughts guide our experiences. And so we're going to start today by sharing our statement of oneness, and that will lead us into our opening prayer. So say with me, there is one presence and one power in my life and the universe, God, the good, omnipotent. Today's prayer is a daily word. I find my renewal in spirit. Committing to thinking new thoughts brings me new positive feelings and a fresh way to be in the world. This renewal changes my outlook. Where before I might have found problems, I now open myself to possibilities. I turn thoughts of lack to prayer, prayers of abundance, and worries about health to the realization of wholeness. My renewal in spirit makes my experience of life so much richer. Colors are brighter, flavors are bolder, and the music of nature fills my soul. Simply to walk on the wonderful earth and fully engage my senses is uplifting. My soul is restored when I am fully present in the world. I am free to imagine all there is to come. And take a breath and know that you are among friends. And know with me, our dear Helen Swanson, you made such a difference to us, to your family, and to so many. We know that you move easily into your new role in service to all of humanity. We hold you in our hearts. We know that you are safe and in joy and knowing the presence. And so it is. Amen. Last week we had our annual meeting. We have a new set of officers. Will they be posted, Alan, on the website? They're posted on the website already. Not yet, but will be. And we are deeply appreciative of all of you who are in service to Unity because you make a difference. Unity is you. And your actions, your prayers, your commitment to time, talent, service, and treasure are deeply appreciated. It makes Unity the wonderful place that it is. If anyone you know is in need of prayer, please go to our website and let us know the request, and we are happy to pray for you. You can also call Unity's telephone prayer line, Silent Unity. And now it gives me great pleasure to invite our wonderful Patrice to speak to the congregation. It's been a while since you've been with us, Patrice, but I remember fondly your last talk on prayer, and I no longer make my grandchildren say the prayer of "Now I lay me down to sleep." It was a powerful message. Anyway, we welcome you, and please give her a round of applause. She's one of our own.
Good morning. It's always such a pleasure to be back here. And how fondly I remember Helen also, because I studied Course in Miracles with her. And so it was lovely to hold her in my heart and remember those days. We're going to talk about giving up doubt and feasting on faith for Lent. We are in the time of Lent, that miraculous period that commemorates the days leading up to the resurrection. We follow Jesus into the wilderness as he resists temptation, fasts, and proceeds on the way to the cross. Every year at this time, we should feel ourselves both deeply comforted and uncomfortably prodded. The Bible says Jesus took 40 days of retreat to pray and fast, and that during that time, he was tempted by Satan. He was human like us, and like us, he was challenged. But he overcame temptation because he was so sure of who he was. He knew whose he was. In other words, he knew he was the Son of God. And knowing this freed him. Once he was emancipated from these last temptations, he was free to begin his public ministry. We know what it is like to be challenged and tempted to get off our path, to forget whose we are. This release of every earthly challenge meant Jesus would not fear anything, even the political state which sought to kill him. He had no concern about the end of this human life, not 1 ounce of doubt on who he had come to this plane to be. He was ready to fulfill his purpose. In the Christian tradition, this past Wednesday was Ash Wednesday, the first day of Lent, when many traditions wear ashes on their forehead to remind us that we must be willing to die to our old selves, to be raised to new life. Ashes symbolize the dust and broken debris of this life, a reminder that this is only temporary. Being on the cross was a victory for Jesus, an illustration of what victory can look like in the spiritual realm, which is totally different than it may look like when we only see with our human eyes. Gregory Elder, a Roman Catholic priest, says Lent is less about sorrow and more about love, less about a victim and more about victor, less about sin and more about transformation, a transformation purchased willingly and at great cost. We are in the waiting period before victory. Lent represents an in-between time, those days when we are tested and have an opportunity to discover anew who we are and to recommit ourselves to being that and fulfilling our purpose. When we embark upon the process of discovering who we are to be, we leave the busyness of life behind, the running here and there in search of someone or something to mirror to us who we are. We exhale and we simply be. Unity co-founder Charles Fillmore believed Lent marked a time for personal transformation. Lent is a season of spiritual growth, a time for progressive unfoldment, Fillmore wrote. He wrote that observing Lent involves fasting, which means abstaining from. Abstinence is overcoming human consciousness, he said, and he called upon us to abstain from errant thinking during this time and to meditate upon spiritual truth until the achievement of oneness with God. Yes. So I invite you this Lent to abstain from doubt and to instead feast on faith. Lent is more serious than just giving up beer or sweets. Now, I'm not knocking this kind of ritual. It has its place, but it is simply a stand-in to represent something much deeper. I am by profession a writer, by nature a storyteller, and so to explain how I view Lent, I offer a personal journey. For Lent is a metaphor for all the days of human life, this one lengthy journey full of challenges and transformations before victory. When we overcome the challenge of doubt, we can expect a greater intimacy with God, an increase in our faith. Now, I used to pray every day for years to know God more fully. That was my one prayer. I repeated daily, God, I prayed to know you more fully. Every day for I don't know how many years, that was my prayer. I believe from what I learned in Unity and before that praying, talking, and listening to God, retreating in silence as Jesus did, would allow me to be the recipient of a stronger sense of my relationship with the divine, and at the same time arrive at a more authentic sense of myself. It was that oneness that Charles Fillmore spoke of, going beyond human consciousness. And yet, I did not connect my daily prayer to know God more fully to what would happen to me later while I was here at Unity. I may have mentioned this to some of you before, but I want to explore this personal journey in more detail. I live in Lake Wylie, South Carolina. And while I was attending Unity, I began attending classes at Winthrop College in Rock Hill. My route home always took me past this little white church where I would hear voices call out to me, come over here. You need to go to this church. Come over to this church. Now, I hear voices from time to time, so I was not startled. I looked at the church as I passed, and I thought, it's nice. An old historic church from the 1800s, and I like old. On another day, as I received the calls of invitation, I glanced over the church and said, it's small. I like small. I'm not much of a mega church lady. But I kept speeding by. The truth was, I did not want to join any other church. I wasn't looking for a new congregation or a place to worship. I was happy and contented at Unity of Charlotte. But the voices continued. Why? What did they mean? I asked myself, but myself didn't have an answer. And so you could say, I retreated. I meditated and I prayed about this. I wrestled with the temptation to ignore the voices, though in other instances in my life when voices spoke to me, I gladly rejoiced. And each time I followed them, it led me in a good and right direction, generally to something better than what I would have found on my own. But then I realized I listened joyfully only when the voices told me what I wanted to hear. This time, the message made me anxious and filled me with doubt. I read in a homily by Reverend Monsignor Joseph Pellegrino of the Diocese of St. Petersburg that two of the temptations that Jesus faced during those 40 days were self-centeredness and the temptation to ignore God. Now, haven't you had those times when it just seemed like it would be easier to ignore God than to follow what you believe you were being told to do? I ignored those voices for as long as I could. Even though I felt in my heart that they were from the light and right and sacred and good, somehow God expressing itself through these voices. Still, I was tempted to do what I wanted to do. I was tempted to be self-centered, to stay right here. Meanwhile, I continued to pray. God, I pray to know you more fully. After spending some time in silence and prayer about the voices, this happened. I went to Bible study held at a church in my neighborhood. I met a woman named Lori, and we became fast friends. One day she said, I want you to meet my pastor. I've told him about you. The two of you talk alike. You say some of the same things. Can we all have lunch together? Now, I admit I was thinking, who invites someone to meet their pastor for lunch? She must be some big wig at the church. Why does she want me to meet her pastor anyway? But as I said, I liked Lori. So I agreed to meet her pastor. She gave me the address, and on the agreed upon date, I put it in my GPS and followed, and you can guess what happened. Yes, it led me to the historic little white church, the one where the voices beckoned me each time I passed. Oh God, you really have jokes, I laughed. Then I met Pastor Sam, and when he stuck out his hand to greet me, I felt the most loving energy, and it made me curious. He took me on a tour of the grounds of the church. As we walked, I found out Lori had recently joined the church. She was not a bigwig. Our first stop was a cemetery for slaves and freed Blacks. We walked onto the grounds through an opening in an old stone wall, and I can only describe it as feeling as if I was stepping into a cathedral. That's what it felt like to me. I looked up at tall pine trees and saw blue sky at their tips. They seemed to form a natural skylight and a canopy over me. I heard a choir singing. I knew that I was standing on sacred ground, and I also knew that this is where the voices had come from. The people who had beckoned me to come to this church were freed and enslaved Blacks buried in this cemetery. I was certain of it. The grounds were beautifully kept. The grave sites were weeded and marked with small white crosses. It told me that the white people of this church respected a history that many white people chose to ignore, and that they honored the legacy of Black people once owned by their own members. I kept all of these thoughts to myself. I mean, how do you tell two people that you just met, that you hear voices every time you pass their church, and that now you hear a choir? Besides, I needed to process questions like, why would God want me here? I was not finished with my doubting. In my talks with God, I said things like, it's a Presbyterian church, and I am not Presbyterian. A voice said, Patrice, there is only one God. At the invitation of Pastor Sam, I spoke at the church one Sunday. I noticed one or two Black people in the congregation of about 70. I remember as a kid that I always wondered about that one Black person when I saw them at a white church or a school or a meeting. So yes, I admit I had the nerve to mention this to God. There are no Black people, I said. You're a bridge, the voice said. This struck me at my core. A bridge, I asked. I know what a bridge does, but what does it mean to be a bridge? Honestly, a part of me thought it meant allowing people to walk on my back, a notion that brought up old pain and past hurts. Then I thought of all the times in my life when I had bridged two different groups of people together. In my social justice work, it was those who had been incarcerated with those who are supposed to be free. As a reporter, it was the Black residents of urban Washington, D.C., the readers from the white suburb. Was this who I am? Was this who I was being called to be on the next leg of my journey? My doubt was waning, nearly gone. I counted all the ways in which God was trying to reach me. The voices, my retreating prayers that drew answers, a loving hand, a cathedral in the forest and a chorus, sacred cemetery land, home to ancestors who were reaching out to me. I said yes to being a bridge. And what has feasting on faith brought me? I have witnessed the definition of a bridge unfurl before me ever since I said yes. Early on, I took Lori, the friend who introduced me to the pastor, to see one of my favorite spots in Charlotte, a prayer room called 24/7. I call it a spiritual museum. It has different stations you visit and spiritual books everywhere, music and videos that you can experience, a labyrinth to walk. The people there told us they had built a similar outdoor space at a church in Stanley, North Carolina. We went there and Lori told me, we have been looking for something like this. It's perfect. That's when I found out that Allison Creek Presbyterian Church had acres. It wanted to create what it now calls common ground, land that welcomes all people. Today, there are paths with interactive stations. For instance, a clothesline where you can hang notes of forgiveness, a rainbow bridge where you can write the name of your pets that have passed on, a place to paint a name on a rock and then set it into a cross. There is a bottle tree that glistens in the sun, walking sticks to use as you circle the cemetery, and much, much more. Y'all have to come and take a field trip and I'll show you around. The Black descendants of some of the people buried in our cemetery, I learned, left York, South Carolina after the Emancipation Proclamation. They were free, but regularly terrorized by the York Ku Klux Klan. So they left South Carolina and went to Liberia. Allison Creek has a sister relationship with the church in Monrovia, Liberia, where some of the descendants, the members of those descendants, attend. I met the pastor of the Liberian church when he came to visit us in York, and I asked Sam, has anyone from Allison Creek been to Liberia? I was surprised when he said no. So you know what I suggested. We should go, I said. I went to Liberia with the first group from the church. And as we stood at the cemetery there in Africa on South Carolina Road, Sam and I sobbed over the tombstone of a freed slave born in York, South Carolina. At that moment, it hit me what it meant to be a bridge. I saw my arms stretching across an ocean, and I asked those voices that had beckoned to me, what now? What else is there to do? I mistakenly felt that my mission or purpose had been accomplished. I was ready to return back to unity. I had been a bridge to the past and the present, but then I was elected as elder or a member of session, which is the governing body of a Presbyterian church. As part of the ordination service, you kneel at the front of the church while former elders put their hands on your head to ask God to bless you. Sam told me later that the person with his hand on my head was the son of a founding family of the church, and that his father had once voted for the church to be a whites-only congregation. In fact, this man's ancestor had been a Ku Klux Klansman. All I know is that I felt warmth on my head, the kind of peace and love I imagine I'll feel when I stand before God. Willingness, obedience, and surrender are the keys to resurrection, wrote Reverend Galen McDowell, a minister at Christ Universal Temple in Chicago. The ego must surrender to the Christ of your own being. It is the same message the poet-philosopher Rumi wrote when he said, to become spiritual, you must die to self and come alive in the Lord. Only then will the mysteries of God fall from your lips. To die to self through self-discipline causes suffering, but brings you everlasting life. We have to cross out our beliefs that aren't consistent with the truth of our being, says Reverend McDowell. We have to be willing to surrender to the higher wisdom of the indwelling Christ. When we are willing to surrender, we gain conscious awareness of our own true spiritual nature. Now, this is my journey. You may be exactly where you are meant to be. The point is not that I had to leave unity to become more spiritual or godly. I had to leave to be more of a bridge, which led me to know God more fully, which is what I had prayed for. I had to obey, to remove all doubt, to allow my faith to bloom. We are reminded at Lent that this is the kind of transformation possible. During the season of spiritual growth, add doubt to the list of what you are giving up. Give up doubt along with the chocolate and vodka. And after 40 days, satisfy your hunger by feasting on faith. And so it is.
And now comes the time for our offertory. And I'd like to remind you that as we express our gratitude and fill our hearts with joy, that we also remember Helen Swanson. And I wanted to and be grateful for the life and the impact she had on all of us. And I wanted to also let you know that there is a memorial service for her planned this Saturday at 2 p.m. right here at the church. So put it on your calendar. And now as we get ready for our offertory, there are many ways to support this church. And if you, as you give of your treasure, there's an easy way to do it because you can give through the website, or you can bring it to service, or you can write an old-fashioned check and put it in the mail. All of those are just fine. Join with me in our prosperity blessing and take it to heart. Joyously, I give this gift, knowing the divine presence blesses and multiplies all that I am, all that I have, all that I give, and all that I receive. Thank you, God. And now our choir, our wonderful choir. You, wow, the best of the best of the best. So Lawrence is going to give us a gift here this morning. Give me your hand and welcome him to the podium, not only as our choir director, our board member, but our new president of the board.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Reverend Pat. I have to take a few minutes before we start, Alan. I have to acknowledge that the word bridge has a great deal to do with what I'm going to sing to you today. Some of you may already know that today is the anniversary of what is called Bloody Sunday. Some of you may remember that on March 7th, 1965, our television screens were witness to John Lewis, Andy Young, and a lot of other senior leaders of the civil rights movement, 1965. and they were crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma. They were hosed. Clubs were taken to their heads. They were knocked down. Dogs were sicked on them. Many injuries and hundreds of arrests by the state troopers of Alabama, as well as the local police. So this anniversary of that crossing of a bridge is worth acknowledging by us. And at the same time, you just heard a wonderful message from Patrice Gains about being a bridge. And that is a message intended for each of you to be a bridge. Can I get an amen? This song, Give Me Your Hand, is a very old spiritual. I had never heard it, but I loved the verses. So I contacted my sister in Chesapeake, Virginia. I faxed her the score for the song and said, please play this, record it for me. I want to hear what the song sounds like. So she played it. She did a recording, and that I shared that recording with our music director, Greg James. He's not here right now, but he took the recording because he's a man who plays by ear. He's very creative. He doesn't read scores. So I had to have two steps to get through this creative process where he and I, 2 Saturdays ago, worked up what this new spiritual should sound like. And so today is the first performance of the first new spiritual I ever participated in creating. Oh, give me your hand. Give me your hand. All I want is the love of God. Give me your hand. Give me your hand. You must be loving at God's command. Oh, give me your hand. Give me your hand. All I want is the love of God. Give me your hand. Give me your hand. You must be loving as God commands. You say you're aiming for the sky. Why don't you stop your telling that lie? Whoa, give me your hand. Give me your hand. All I want is the love of God. Give me your hand. Give me your hand. You must be loving at God's command. Open your heart. Open your heart. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. Open your heart. You say you're glad you've been set free. Why don't you let your neighbor be? Oh, give me your hand, give me your hand. All I want is the love of God. Give me your hand, give me your hand. You must be loving as God commands. Thank you.
Beautiful.
Extraordinary. Thank you. The theme of being a bridge is an extraordinary one. And thank you, Patrice, for taking us there. And thank you for singing us there, Lawrence. We are now coming to the end of our service. And I want to remind you how we finish up here. We do have our prayer unity room that will be open afterwards. And Patrice, can you join us there? Great. We just have a casual conversation, and it's a wonderful place to exchange with other people and with you as well. Thank you. What we do at the end here is after the prayer, after the song, the peace song, we move our chairs to the side so they can be stacked, and people who are able are asked to help stack those chairs, and we exit fairly quickly within about 5 minutes. We save our conversation for the unity room afterwards, and that way it all happens peacefully. Our Sikh community is here, and they are having their time now as well. So I would like to right now have you join in our very favored prayer, the prayer of protection, which reminds us that we are always surrounded and in the presence of God, and God is holding our hand. So join with me in saying, the light of God surrounds us, the love of God enfolds us, the power of God protects us, the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is, and all is well.